Hello and welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, journalist Helen Fospero. Joe Brand dubbed this week's guest the thinking woman's Bakewell tart. Lord Sugar said, I always knew he was quite creative, but I had no idea he was so reckless. When Nick Hewer first appeared on our TV screens in 2005 in The Apprentice, he just turned 61 and thought he was heading towards a quiet retirement after a successful career in PR and marketing. But his wry wit and astute observations made him an unexpected household name, along with his partner in crime, Margaret Mountford. And now, age 77, I can't believe he's actually 77, he's only just about to hang up his TV hat after 9 years hosting Channel 4's popular afternoon quiz show Countdown, which is where Nick and I met on my first appearance in Dictionary Corner. Nick has finally, under a little bit of duress, written his autobiography, My Alphabet, and today I'm going to ask him some of the stories which have made up the A to Z of his extraordinary life so far. So hello, Nick, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
What an intro, hey?
It was excellent. And actually, I'm stepping down from Countdown, but it won't be until this summer, in my 10th year. So I did 10 years on The Apprentice and 10 years on Countdown. And I think that's about the right length of time, don't you?
It is, I think. And will you get a teapot or anything for your decade?
I don't know. I hope they're planning a little sort of glass of sherry for my last show. I don't know. But, lockdown has really murdered the sort of sequence of the whole thing. So I've been on and off the show since last March. And fortunately, we had Colin Murray to step in and stand in for me. My last, I think, studio block is in March. And then I shall pray for summer. I shall pray that my vaccinations, which I haven't yet had, will prove efficacious. And I shall head off to France with my new dog.
Oh, your new dog. Tell us about your new dog. Who's your new dog?
Well, I had to plead with my partner, Catherine, that I needed a dog which would in fact be a therapy dog. And that argument had some traction. And last Saturday, I received Molly, an 8-week-old Labrador pup, the sweetest thing you've ever seen. And I spend hours with Molly trying to stop her pooing. But anyway, she's a delight, and that's my new focus in life.
Why did you need her for therapy? Do you find her quite soothing?
Well, I've had dogs in the past. My last dog, Jasmine, which was also a little black Labrador, died a few years ago. And I got another dog. Don't tell anybody about this, because it's rather tragic. And she was called Hunter. She was the most beautiful dog, a working dog. But unfortunately, while she was extraordinary outdoors, she was terrible in the house. She growled at everybody. She obviously had a deep-seated psychiatric problem to such an extent that we couldn't keep her. So I gave her back to the person from whom I'd bought her on the provision that when she had a puppy, I'll have a puppy. So Molly is the puppy of Hunter, and let's hope that she hasn't inherited any of these psychiatric problems that her mother had.
Oh, let's hope so. I'm glad you've got a puppy. I've never had a dog. I would love one, but in a 5th floor balcony apartment, maybe that's not such a great idea. I borrow friends' dogs. That's okay, isn't it? So we've sort of leapt ahead, actually, to Countdown. Why have you decided to, after a decade, give it up? And I thought that you shouldn't deserve a bit of rest at this stage of your career and life.
Exactly. Lockdown brought me to my senses in a way. Because we live in the country, we're very lucky. We have a lot of space. There are only 2 of us. Well, 3 actually, because Sid the cat is part of the family. And I began to think, what am I rushing off to the studio for when I can be pottering around the house? And we've got, it's not exactly a farm, but we've got about 15 acres of woodland and paddocks and things like that. And there's so much to do. And as you say, I'll be 77 next month, actually. I should actually spend more time at home. I never have. So that brought me to my senses. And I thought, well, look, I'll see the sort of 10 years out. My contract comes to an end in March, as things stand at the moment. And I braced myself and decided to do it. Now, of course, I'm all slightly nervous about it, but I'll come to terms with not working. I'm not actually retiring completely. If something lovely comes along that's not too, onerous and time consuming, and I think I can do it, then yes, I will do it. But for the moment, I'm working around the house. Well, I'm putting up an owl box in the wood at the moment.
Oh, an owl box. That sounds exciting.
Yeah, it's fun.
And you like being out on your tractor and everything, don't you?
Yeah, I've got a lovely old tractor. It's a lovely Massey Ferguson from about 1958, but it worked. I mean, it was restored. It's lovely. And I've got old bangers, old cars here that I can fettle is the word, the verb. You fettle old cars. You can look it up. And there's so much to do. And I'm loving it. I just wish the weather was better.
We need Susie, don't we, talking about fettling, because she would tell us exactly what it meant. You have worked with two sensational women, etymologist Susie Dent and also maths expert Rachel Riley. I mean, I bet you'll miss them, won't you? They're fantastic characters.
Well, I'll miss the whole show. I'll miss the team. I mean, the team is enormous. It's, like the cast of Madame Butterfly. There are about 40 of us. The person I'll miss most, setting aside Susie and Rachel for the moment, is the producer, Damon Eady, who's brilliant, quite mad, quite eccentric, but very, very clever and very amusing and slightly dangerous. And then we've got, the sound people, the lighting people. We've got the audience controllers. It's huge. And I'll miss that team because it's a very, very well-oiled machine. I think Susie's little essays that she reads out are extraordinary. She writes 15 per block because we do 3-day blocks and 5 shows each day. As you well know, you've done it many times. She's extraordinarily talented, Susie. Her breadth of education is mind-boggling. And then, of course, you've got Rachel, who blazes through these difficult, mathematical conundrums. And it's a happy old team. It's a happy team. But the time has come, and I'm sure that whoever takes over, I hope they have as much fun as I've had.
I know from joining you many occasions when I just join for a day and we record 5 episodes back to back, but you're always in the middle of 15 episodes back to back over 3 days. I get in my taxi at the end and I feel like I'm dribbling. I mean, are you exhausted at the end of that 3-day stint? Does Catherine have to put you back together when you get back to the farm?
She does, actually. And the thing about it is, Helen, that from the host's point of view, you've got to be sort of up all the time, right through 3 days and 15 shows. And the difficult show is show 4, day 2, because you think, oh no, I've got to be, I've really got to pull myself together, knowing that I've got another one afterwards and then all day tomorrow. And that's the hard one. But I slump in the car too. And I get home and Catherine says, you must be dead with exhaustion, a shepherd's pie for dinner. And that's it. And then I rest up the next day, basically.
So going back to the book, your lovely hardback book that I've got in my hand, let's just flip back to A if we can, because it would be wrong to talk to you without talking about The Apprentice, which I'm afraid I was completely addicted to, and life in the sugar shaker, as you call it. Tell us a bit about that.
I used to work, well, he was a client of mine. I didn't work for him, but he was a client. He was a great client because, of course, he owned Amstrad and he owned Tottenham Hotspur and all the rest of it. So I represented his companies in the media world, PR world, and him too, to a certain extent, and we became friends. I then retired. I sold the company back in 97, and he said, carry on with me if you want. I said, okay. And I had another client who's the Aga Khan, who's the leader of the Ismaili Muslims. So that was an interesting little combination because Alan is Jewish and I'm an Anglo-Irish Catholic, lapsed. And His Highness the Aga Khan, of course, is a Muslim. So the three of us sort of waltzed off from 97 until 2005 when I retired. Formally retired. And in fact, Alan...
You retired 16 years ago.
Alan concocted with my partner, Catherine, a surprise party at the Dorchester, which was extraordinary. I turned up for drinks because we used to meet him quite often on a Thursday for a drink. And it was then revealed that we walked into the ballroom, there were 150 people there that we had dealt with when I worked for him, plus my children and all the rest of it were there. So that was great. And then I did retire for about a month and he rang me up and he said, now look, have you seen this Apprentice? Well, you won't have done because like me, you don't have a house in Florida. But there's this show and it's all about business and the BBC's bought it and I want to be the host. Donald Trump, he's a business bloke in New York, he said. He does it. He's not bad.
But I think I'd like to do it, and we've got to persuade the BBC that I'm the bloke to do it. Anyway, we did persuade the BBC. And then he said to me, now, I need 2 advisors. You'll be one. I said, well, hold on a minute, Alan, that's not quite me. He said, no, I'll sort out the fee, which I thought was hilarious because I'd been fighting him over my PR fee for about 20 years without ever getting an extra penny. And here he is going in to bat for me with the BBC. I said, what about the woman? There's a woman, isn't there? He said, yes, Margaret Manford. I said, you've got to be kidding. Margaret Manford? You talking about Margaret, head of corporate law at Herbert Smith, one of the golden 5. Got a first in Greco-Roman, whatever, philosophy at Girton College, Cambridge. You think she's going on to some popular reality television show? Leave it with me, son. And that's how the 3 of us got involved.
Oh, my goodness. I am going to ask you the question that every cabbie asks you. What was it like working with Lord Sugar on the TV show as opposed to your PR role for him?
Absolutely didn't change at all. He's blunt, he's funny, he's loyal, he's smart, sharp as a knife. And we had great fun, actually. But it wasn't all about fun because we had to take it seriously because these youngsters who had sort of, volunteered and actually desperately wanted to be on the telly were, in many cases, laying out their inabilities for public view. But at the end of it all, the winner was always very, very competent. But the great secret that nobody seems to get is that if everybody watching thinks they could do better, then that's what we want them to think, because that teaches them what it's all about. That's what business is about. So it's been a huge success in actually spreading the gospel of not being frightened about business and what are the basics of business. And in that sense, I think it's great. And also there's a new generation. When I first started, little kids of 8 and 9 used to run up and say, oh, you're on The Apprentice, because the parents watched it with the kids. And then everybody chatted about it the following morning round the water cooler. And it's been wonderful. And all the winners, I might tell you, have been very successful. Very successful. So we're very proud of it.
Your chemistry with Margaret was and is fantastic. I was lucky, actually. I spent 4 years with Margaret. She was head of school governors when I was a school governor. And I remember that moment walking in. And of course, I'd watched her on The Apprentice and somebody had said, oh, Margaret Manford's our head of governors. And I was thinking, oh, crumbs, I'm not really sure what I bring to the table with this. And I was quite nervous about meeting her, but I absolutely loved her. I mean, what are your best or funny Margaret memories?
Well, you're right about Margaret. I spoke to her at the end of last week. She's great. I think that her qualities are that she's very smart, very quick, but she's self-deprecating. She makes fun of herself. Too few people have got that ability. And she's modest and she's adorable. So I'm very fond of her. It started off, I think there are a couple of stories. First of all, we're all sitting in the boardroom waiting for the contestants to file in. Margaret says, I'm very sorry, but that big light is shining right in my eye and I can't see. So I want you to switch it off. And a voice came through the speaker system from the producer saying, oh, Margaret, we're so sorry, but the sad thing is that if we turn the light off, we won't be able to see you. And she said, that's absolutely fine with me. So we all sat there until she had to sort of climb down slightly. So, well, if you turn it down a little bit, maybe I could manage. And that was one that we all roared with laughter, and so did she. And the other time was we were all waiting, filming out in the cold somewhere. No matter where you are in London, there's a plane flying over you. And that disrupts, as you know, as a journalist, is no good for sound. So we're there, and we were hidden away in a house, while all the vans were lined up and all the contestants were lined up. And Harry, can you step back and move that vehicle or space? Till everything was absolutely perfect. And there was a moment when a plane was not flying over and we were ushered out and they said, stand there. And Margaret said, I cannot stand on grass. I do not stand on grass. I have my feet to consider. And they said, oh, Margaret, please, because there's a break in the air traffic. Or no, I can't do it. And so she shot off and went back into a vehicle, sat there quietly. So I went in and I said, Margaret, you sounded just like Mussolini there. That was terrible. Honestly, what will people think? She said, do you think so? I said, I'm sure so, Margaret. You sounded just like Mussolini. Anyway, she came out and she stood on the grass for a minute. And then thereafter, she would say, ring me up and say, oh, I had another Mussolini moment today. And it became a sort of a standing joke with the crew and everybody. And God bless her, she's wonderful. No, I keep in good, close touch with her.
Did it feel strange, Nick? You mentioned there that, people stopped you in the street or pointed you out from The Apprentice. Did it feel quite strange that after all those years in your own business and being very much behind the scenes, not on television, that people came up to you because they recognised you or voiced an opinion on The Apprentice? Was that quite an odd thing?
Yeah, I suppose it was to begin with, but I think that I keep my feet on the ground. The people I cannot stand, other minor celebrities like me, I can't stand them, is when they sort of blank people who want to take their picture or who want to say hello or want to say I love your show, or people who want to say I think you're terrible or whatever it is, and they completely ignore them. I think that's awful, and I won't have anything to do with it. So if somebody comes up to me, I hope, always polite and generous, because who do we think we are to think that we're so important that we're rude to people? I can't bear it. So I hope I've never thought that I was a big shot.
Oh, I don't think you have. You come across very humble and you're self-deprecating too.
Well, I hope so. The thing is that when one's friends and family recognize you and are kind to you, it's nice. But imagine, it's rather flattering that a complete stranger is nice to you. What's wrong with that? I think it's charming, and we owe it to those people to be kind because they're the ones that watch the show, that make up the figures, that gets the commission, that pays the wages. People fail to recognize these minor celebs, and celebrity is a dangerous thing. I think it was John Updike said that celebrity is a mask that eats your face, because when you take it off all those years later, there's nothing left of you, if you think you're a big shot. Now, the point about being kind to people who spot you on the tube or on the train or at the station, want to take a selfie, I always say, sure, of course, let's do it when we get off the train at Euston and we'll go behind a pillar. Because one doesn't want to make a big deal about it, but by the same token, if it means something to them, who am I to say no for the sake of 30 seconds? These are the people that watch the show. These are the people that tell their friends about it. These are the people that make up the viewing figures, that gets the recommission, that pays the silly money that we're paid.
I love the fact that the last chapter of your book is Z for Z-list. And I was going to ask you, actually, how a modicum of fame as a Z-lister, your words, not mine, had changed your life. But you've clearly enjoyed it, Nick. And, it gets us to opening of envelopes and things like that, doesn't it? Which is great fun.
Yeah. I mean, I count myself as being incredibly lucky. There were two big things in my life, in my working life. One was working with Alan Sugar, and that turned into The Apprentice, and that turned in, since, 15 years, into a sort of a media thing. Not only has it been fun, but shamefacedly, I would say, that it pays quite well. So I can go into retirement not worrying, not being in a panic.
Well, that's a good place to be. I'd like to dip into, I'm flipping all over the place, but I'd like to dip into B for boyhood and your childhood. Home life at the Grange in Swindon, which your grandpa bought in the 30s. And it sounds to me like it was a bit out of a period drama with talk of a groom and a maid and a stable yard.
I know.
It sounded quite magical.
Well,
what was it like?
It was a bit like that because grandpa bought it. And then when he retired, we moved in as young children. And it does sound grand. And it had this sort of accoutrements, is that the right word, of being grand, because there was a full-time gardener who would polish the vegetables and present them to my mother every morning. And my grandpa's groom stayed on and he became known as a yardman. But the reality of it was that there wasn't much money. So Dad would run around turning lights off, because that was a wartime thing. And we didn't have expensive holidays and things like that. But we had the sort of infrastructure that was privileged without the sort of money to exercise it properly. You with me?
Yes, I am. I completely get what you mean.
So my father was a partner in this practice, as indeed his father had been. The practice itself had started, believe it or not, in the 1830s. It was quite extraordinary. Anyway, Grandpa took it over, And then his son, my father, took over. It was a large animal practice. In Dad's day, they all sort of wandered around in Land Rovers up in the hills in the Marlborough Downs, with sheep and pigs and cows and all the rest of it. And my father was completely unsentimental. And if he saw what people were doing with their dogs and cats these days, he'd be horrified, absolutely horrified. The sentimentality, people dressing their dogs up in little sweaters and all that sort of carry on. He would have been horrified. He was very practical. The family joke was that when he retired, he shot his dog. And when my mother said, "Why did you do that, darling?" He said, "I've retired and I can't possibly afford a dog." It was a joke because he hadn't shot the dog, but it wouldn't have bothered him.
You're from a big family, Nick, and it sounds like there were lots of jolly japes when you were growing up. I think you were quite mischievous, weren't you?
Well, there were 5 children. It was a funny family. I would argue in a little softly spoken way that's quite dysfunctional, actually, because all the kids, as soon as they grew up, they were shot off to different schools. So my elder brother, at the age of 7, was sent off to a prep school, boarding prep school. So I lost touch with him. I really sort of never connected with him. My younger brother, he went off to another school. I went off to a third school. Then the 3 boys all went off to the same school. When I was about 11, my brother would have been 12 and a half, and my younger brother, he would have arrived at about 10, I suppose. And my sisters, they went off to a convent. So the family only met in the holidays. Not a good thing, really. So we're not a particularly close family, sadly.
So back to our alphabet trot. I liked F for frights and being out of your depth on a particular product launch in your PR days.
This was extraordinary. I tell you what happened. We acted for a chemicals company in the north of England that made lots and lots of products for cars, how to make them start easily if the engine was wet, and polishes and all this sort of carry on. It was a big company, big outfit. The American advertising agency was called J. Walter Thompson, which was a huge outfit. They came up with an advertisement for this LPS, which showed a car immersed in a huge glass tank of water with the engine running and the lights on. And I doubt that ever really happened. And the company said, "Well, there you are, J. Walter Thompson. So we think you should do it for real." I said, "Excellent idea. So what we'll do is we'll drive it under the Thames." All right, that'll be good. We'll have all the press there, and we'll get a driver and put him in a frogman's uniform, spray the engine, and drive it under the Thames. Well, of course, it's not as easy as that. So we bought this car, and I thought, what on earth am I going to do? So I rang up the underwater part of the army, which is based down in Devon, I think, Barnstable. And I said, "You couldn't lend me one of your blokes that deals with tanks that run, go underwater, could you? Because we need to prepare this car to drive under the Thames." He said, "Yeah, absolutely, no problem at all." So he sent this squaddy up to the Thames embankment, and he housed him up there for 3 days. And we had promised Tomorrow's World, which was a huge program in those days, that we would show how it would drive under the Thames by immersing it in a tank of water in the studio. Well, the night before, the squaddy rang me, said, "Well, I've left the keys in the local pub. I'm off home now." I said, "What do you mean you're off home?" He said, "No, I can't work it all out, mate. I'm off home now." So I thought, I've got to be in the studio tomorrow at 11 o'clock for filming the success of this thing. And it doesn't work. And the car is now on the embankment. I shot down there, got the keys, and in tears, I rang up a car recovery company and said, "Can you come and get this car?" I didn't know what I was going to do. Where was I going to take this thing? So this chap arrived. I said, "I don't suppose you know anybody that could, attach a tube that goes from the manifold up above the roofline and do this, that, and the other." He said, "Yeah, no worries, mate. I can do that. I'll take you to him." And we went up to Hanger Lane, knocked on a door, which are one of those sort of makeshift garages full of criminals. And the criminal came out. His name was Peter Keegan. And I told him the problem. He said, "I can do that. We'll work through the night." And he did. He made it work. And I stayed up all night with them, giving them sandwiches and running off for coffee. And they made it work. It was incredible. It was wonderful. He was a brilliant bloke, but he was a dodgy character. And you know the sad end to this story? About 8 months later, somebody shot him dead.
Oh, that's
awful.
Really sad,
he was such
what an incredible story, and he saved your bacon. Absolutely. I love the fact that as a PR person, when you were asked if you could do that, your reaction was yes, of course, because of course that is how PR people have to respond to those challenges, isn't it? That yes, of course we can do that.
Oh, we did some crazy things. We really did. Anyway, that's another story.
So L is for La Croix. Now, whenever we see each other at the Countdown studios in the makeup room, you seem to be either just heading out to the southwest of France or you've just returned.
Yeah.
So that's my next choice from your book. Tell us a bit about why you bought in France in the first place and what a special place that is to you.
Oh, it's very important. 30 years ago, I don't get into it too deeply, but, I was divorced way back in 85. And I was living in London by this time. And, as is quite rightly the way in divorces, I gave my wife the house. And therefore I was in a bit of a struggle because, difficult to do that and then buy a house in London. So I thought, what do I do? Because I was renting a flat. And I thought, well, I'll tell you what I'll do, because it'd be great to see the kids during the holidays. I'll buy a house in France because A, it would be quite alluring. And secondly, they're cheap. So I bought a little farmhouse in the southwest of France, which was cheap and very beautiful, with a couple of acres and a little pigeonnier and a big barn. And over the last 30 years, I've turned it into a lovely place. There's a pool and the lawns and all that sort of carry on. But it's been a real home from home. Sadly, I've not been down there since, I think, September of the year before last. Is that right? Yeah. I went down there during a break in lockdown last year for about 3 days, because then I had to rush home because of the threat of quarantine. So I'm rather broken-hearted. I've got somebody that comes and looks over it once a week. There's a sort of concierge that comes and looks at it. But it's such a lovely place. It'll come back.
And Willie, the wartime Jeep, will be missing you, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. I bought that when I pretty much first bought it. A rebuilt World War II Willys Jeep, which is a classic vehicle. I love it. And I go off-road through the woods and the forest down in the southwest of France in it, with the windscreen flat on the bonnet, and with a dog sitting, when I had a dog, and Molly will do the same, sitting beside me. There is no more relaxing thing to do. And there's nobody down there. It's an empty quarter in a way. And fruit trees and wild animals. I love it. I love it.
You also have done your fair share of exciting, and it has to be said, fairly wild travel, Nick. Last night's bedtime reading for me was Mongolia.
That was good. I love that. What happened was I went with a mate of mine to a pub in Covent Garden, and he was involved with Parliament in quite a big way. And one of the people we met there for a drink was an MP. And he said, actually, I've got to go, lads, because I'm starting the Mongol Rally tomorrow. My ears pricked up. I said, what's the Mongol Rally? He said, it's all these lunatics. They buy a car. It's got to be a small engine, less than 1,000 cc's, I think, and less than, I think, £1,000 or something. And then they drive to Mongolia. I said, where does this start tomorrow then? He said, Hyde Park. I said, what time? He said 11 o'clock. I said, I'll be there. And I was there. I was entranced by it. And I spoke to some of the guys. They're all kids, but there were some old geezers like me. I was then 64, 63. I was in for it. So I spoke to the organizer and he said, yeah, okay, we'll make a place for you. So I went off, bought a little Renault 4 and set off. I said to a mate, do you want to come? He said, absolutely. But when push came to shove, he was busy. So now I'm on my own to drive 12,000 kilometers through, it took me 51 days through 16 countries. I loved every minute. It was amazing. You couldn't do it now, sadly, but I went all the way through Europe. I went up to Poland to speak to a mate of mine, really about, is it wise to drive through Russia? He said, absolutely not. You're mad. So I went down through the Czech Republic into Romania, into Hungary too, into Romania, then into the Ukraine, along the Black Sea, beautiful, absolutely beautiful, into Russia, into Rostov, up to Stalingrad. And then I drove around the Caspian to Kazakhstan. Then I drove across Kazakhstan. Murder. Potholes that you could hide a double-decker bus in. It was crazy, and it was desert, and it was amazing and horrible. Round the Aral Sea, that was worrying. I went into Aral City. I was chased out of Aral City. I went into a hotel, asked where the bathroom was. He said, no, there's no bathroom. There's no water in our old city. I thought, what is this all about? Drove out, then down to Kyrgyzstan, back through Kazakhstan into Siberia to the Altai, and then across Mongolia. It was the best thing ever. And today you couldn't do it because you wouldn't feel safe in Russia, I think, and you'd struggle in some of the other countries. But it was wonderful. I loved it.
And you ended up in a pothole at one point.
What happened was that I was driving for long periods of time. This was in Kazakhstan, which was awful. Because you drive on the road, and then when the holes got too big, you drive in the desert, and then you get bogged down, and you have to try and get back up onto the road, which was raised above the level of the desert. Anyway, I'm driving along, because I was driving maybe 12, 13 hours at a stretch. It's a big country. Kazakhstan is bigger than Europe. And I fell asleep. And there was a big explosion which woke me up. And I thought, oh my God, I've been shot. And I slewed into the side of the road and I got out. And of course, I'd hit a big, deep pothole, completely written off one wheel. Actually written off two wheels. That's right, front and back. I thought, oh no, I've only got one spare. Stupid boy. I thought, well, that's it. That's it. Because the wheels were completely wrecked. It's now, 43 degrees in the desert. Hot. Occasionally a lorry would trundle past, but no traffic. I thought, what am I going to do? I'll just have to grab a bag out of it, just leave the car and try and get a lift. Suddenly a little Jeep came trundling past and I didn't even wave at it. I'd just given up. It stopped and turned around and came back. And a big bloke got out, big beard, and his two kids. He looked at the thing and he went back in, brought out a big hammer, jacked my car up. We didn't speak each other's language. I just stood and watched him. He took the wheel off and then he banged the wheel straight. Extraordinary. It was like an artist with this huge, huge hammer. Put it back on, blew up the tire and said, you Christian? I said, yeah. He said, me Mussulman, which is Muslim. Okay. Gave me a big hug. Anyway, I gave him a great fistful of notes, which he took. And we hugged each other, and he went off again. And I reckon he was sort of a guardian angel.
Gosh. I wonder if these stories are what made Lord Sugar say that he knew you were creative, but I had no idea you were so reckless, because that journey is just one of lots of journeys in your book, which is quite extraordinary. And the fact you chose to go by yourself, you're quite the adventurer that I didn't really know until I started delving into your stories. I'd like to end, if we can, Nick, with V for Verve and your wonderful sounding partner, Catherine. You choked me up. The message that you put, I can't remember what it's called, the message in the beginning of the book, but the words that authors put at the beginning of their book, I loved the message. And when you said that she righted the hull and steered you into kinder and safer waters, what has Catherine brought to your world and your life?
Well, I'll tell you, because I've got the thing here. It says Catherine, who righted this old boat, corked the hull, took the helm and steered me into safer and kinder waters. And it's true, really, because I led a very ramshackle life, working 7 days a week in the office till 10 at night. It was smoking and drinking coffee and really just working. I suppose it was, I was on my own in London and all that. That's the way it was. I knew her before when we were young. She was a student in London when I was first starting out in the mid-60s. And nothing came of that. And then she sadly was widowed, actually. So we hitched up again 25 years ago. So it's been quite an extraordinary, what shall I say, outcome. Very fortunate, very lucky.
Well, I'm going to leave you alone to go tinkering with your cars or whatever you're up to today. What sort of cars have you got tucked away, Nick? Are they really old ones that you tinker with?
Well, a bit of a car nut. So I've got a 1930 Swallow boat-tailed racer, I suppose, which is a beautiful, tiny little thing. I've got a 1936 Austin Opal, which is a little two-seater convertible Austin 7, which is sweet. And then I've got my Willys and the Jeep. That's down in France with my little Renault 4. And I like about my tractor. So
yeah, I know all about your tractor. Your tractor's on the back of the book, actually. I'm going to ask you for that photograph so everyone can see you on your tractor in your suit and tie, which has made a fantastic image. I'd just like to say, Nick, you will be missed by millions on Countdown. I mean, you really have become a fixture in our living rooms, and I personally will miss your kind and encouraging words whenever I appear, because when I pop up occasionally in Dictionary Corner, the enthusiasm with which you ask me back on air always makes me smile. But more importantly, my mum and dad, you've been a trooper, she says, being slightly choked up.
Well, that's very sweet of you. That's very sweet. And I'm glad that I looked after you, because I think that's my job, to look after the guest and to look after the contestants, because they come on and they're so worried. And I say, don't worry. We'll look after you. Nobody gets hurt here.
You're very reassuring. Do stay in touch, Nick. You've been listening to Nick Hewer, who became an unlikely and much-loved household name after a successful career in PR and marketing. There are plenty more tales in Nick's book, My Alphabet, A Life from A to Z, and I highly recommend it. It's kept me entertained for the last fortnight. So thanks very much for listening to The Convex Conversation. You can download and subscribe at convex.podbean.com, or search for us on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, or simply ask Alexa. And if you're a Countdown fan, do check out the episode we recorded with Susie Dent. I'll be back with another great guest next week, so I hope you'll join me then.